actually stay down here. Oh, Octavio. Because it'd be more comfortable for me. And I want to also thank Nancy McQueen, because she provided me with a lot of good information about Cal State LA. I should tell you a little bit about, so you see the title is First Generation Equity Practitioner. So oftentimes we talk about students as being first generation, but we don't often talk about faculty as being first generation equity practitioners, given the changing student population. So that's part of what I will speak about today. I'm going to speak about several things. But first, let me tell you about the Center for Urban Education, and so that you understand the context of the work that we do. In 1999, when I founded the Center for Urban Education, I did so because I was concerned that the diversity agenda that was trending nationally, primarily in more selective institutions of higher education like the University of Michigan, I didn't see completely the relevance to the institutions like yours, where I felt you had already passed stage 1 of diversity, and that the issue was not about diversity, that it was about creating equity in educational outcomes for those students who were, in fact, making up your diversity. So I founded the center specifically to focus not on diversity, but on equity, and equity in outcomes. And I'll say more about that in the presentation. But the other thing that is different about the work that we do is that oftentimes when we think about institutional change and improving student outcomes, we tend to think about best practices. And in our work, we actually focus on best practitioners, and we use the methods of inquiry as a way for you, I think most of your faculty here, for you to actually study your practices through an equity lens, and that's what I'll be speaking about. Now, I asked your dean, Pamela, is it okay, Pamela? What are the goals of this retreat? And so here are the goals of the retreat. I don't think I can do much about the first bullet point. Maybe I'll set some tone, hopefully. But what I will talk about in my own way is the second bullet, have faculty consider their roles in good teaching practices, have faculty review their own classroom structures, syllabi, assignments, activities, to examine issues of equity and inclusion, to uncover the implicit bias in our teaching practices. And the next to last bullet, I'm kind of changing that one a little bit, because what I'm going to talk about is how you can, as a first generation equity practitioner, how can you become equity minded? And obviously I'm making lots of assumptions. Some of you may not be a first generation equity practitioner, but let me just start with that and we'll move on. So as I said, what we focus on is best practitioners. And the reason for that is that even in your in the student success plan that you submitted, that your university submitted as part of the graduation initiative, I couldn't help myself but notice that all of the strategies are aimed at how to provide students with more services, but there is very little or almost zero talk about the role of faculty in the graduation initiative. And I hope that through my talk today, I will give you some ideas on how to rectify that, if not at the university level, at do you call it NSS or NSS? Okay. So context context always matters, right? So, so I'm going to talk about the first generation or best practitioner by telling you a little bit about Professor John. This is not a fictitious case. Several years ago, I conducted a study that was funded by NSF where I visited institutions that statistically were overproducers of Latinos in the sciences. By the way, you are now one of the top in the country in terms of the production of Latino scientists. And so we wanted to find out what were the faculty at these institutions doing that was creating so much success for Latino students. So one of the people that I interviewed was Professor John. And by the way, the university, even though it's not in California, is not that unlike Cal State Los Angeles. So he had a degree from a top research university. He had college-educated parents. He was teaching at a university that was vying for top-tier status. I don't know if you're doing that. But it was also a university that had a high proportion of first-generation, low-income Mexican-American students. It was, like you, a Hispanic-serving institution. So I interviewed Professor John about the Latino students in STEM, and he was a scientist. And so one of the things that he says to me is, you know, they don't have much education background, and they don't really know what college is like. They think that college is like an extension of high school. They don't realize how much work they need to put in. He's explaining to me why there are low rates of success in STEM for Latino students. So then I, being the interviewer, asked, you know, well, how do you help them? And so he says, well, that's a really interesting question. The way that we have been trying to do it is simply by telling them that what they're doing is just not right. I'm telling them, you know, this is the way you should be doing it. And then he goes on, you know, the psychologist can change the light bulb, psychologist, but the light bulb has to want to change. You know, I can sit there telling them over and over again that they need to approach things differently. But I think they mostly go back to what they already know. And then he concludes by saying, you know, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I think there's a part where if you spend your whole life on the downside of things, you don't expect a lot. You don't think people owe you much. And I thought that this was pretty insightful on his part. You get to college, and instead of saying, well, I am owed a good explanation of this material, and if I didn't get it in lecture, I'm going to go and see the professor and get the explanation. It's kind of, oh, well, I guess I wasn't meant to understand this. They just go ahead and fail. So for me, the challenge is that John, I think, could be a potential equity-minded instructor because he does recognize that these students have not had the experiences that would make them feel entitled to success or to going and seeing the professor for additional help. But what I also saw in this interview is that Professor John, just like the students he teaches, he didn't know what to do. He knew that there was a problem, but he really did not know what to do. And so that's, I don't think that that's so unusual. I think that we are all in that kind of situation because oftentimes we have not been taught how to connect with students in ways that are different from those that we experience if we come from a background like Professor John. So, I would say that the first thing is that to become a best practitioner, or to move from first-generation equity practitioner to advanced, is to have a historical perspective. And in the work that I do with colleges here in California, in Colorado, in Nevada, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, oftentimes I find that there is a little bit of historical amnesia about about race and how inequities have been created. So, for instance, one of the things that often is said about African Americans is, they don't like to swim. They're not really swimmers. I don't know if any of you have heard that. But, so people, white people, just assume, well, it's just something that blacks don't like to do, to swim. And they forget that, in fact, we have a long history of public swimming pools where blacks and also Mexican Americans were not allowed. In Los Angeles, it was up until sometime, I think, in the 60s. So the point that I'm trying to make is, as Janet Margolis did in her book, Stuck in the Shallow End. Does anyone know this book? Okay, so this book is about science and math, and it's about high school students. But the point that she makes by the title of the book is that the reason why John's students might not have been as prepared as he would like them to be is because oftentimes they come from schools where there were no science labs, for instance. So it's the issue is the structure of opportunity. So I would say that it is important to know not only the history of racial relations and inequity here in California, nationally, and in this geographic area. I often ask, how did you become a Hispanic serving institution? It didn't just happen. There were migration patterns. Something happened. There were economic patterns. But a lot of times institutions don't have that history. They think that they hit the 25% Latino mark and suddenly we qualified for Title V money. So the next thing is, I was talking about history. A lot of higher education history books never mention that most of our elite institutions of higher education, University of Virginia, Georgetown, Columbia Teachers College, Yale, and others were built by slave labor. And now, this is the 21st century. This is just coming up now. And I went and I looked in the appendix of history books to see if there was any mention of the role of the institution of enslavement in building our higher education system, and it is totally absent. So that's part of the reason why we don't always know history. So why is it that I'm focusing on race? And I raise this question because it's one that I am often asked. I am often asked, why do you focus on racial equity? Why don't you just focus on socioeconomic status? So here are the arguments for that. First of all, color and other characteristics are visible. Socioeconomic status is not always visible. And most recently I was told at a college, well, race does not exist. It's a social construct. And yes, I do know that. But I also know, and other scholars have pointed out, that it may be a social construct, but the people who are racialized live a particular social reality that is circumscribed by color. The other reason is, that racial groups, Mexican Americans, American Indians, they have been subjected in their history to legal exclusion. They're the only group. Poor people have never been, legally kept out of higher education, of swimming pools, and so on. Financial aid policies exist. Well, they existed, at least until yesterday with the release of the budget, to assist low-income students. But the one thing that we had to address the issue of racial inequity, affirmative action, was eliminated. And if we do focus on socioeconomic status as a form of affirmative action, it will end up not addressing racial equity, because even though there may be proportionally more poverty among African Americans, Latinos, and American Indians, there's still more whites that would qualify because of the numbers. So those are some of the reasons why. So what I'm suggesting here is that in order to be able to address these issues, John needs to understand how to talk about race directly. Now, what happens is that poor John, and particularly if he was working here in the CSU system, which does not provide a good model for how to talk about race openly, because they always use this term, which I have up there, URM. Do you see that up there? Okay. So that is one of the things that makes me the most upset. Because, first of all, who would call it, I mean, would you call yourself a URM? So it's kind of like another indignity, foisted on people who are not white. URM, for those of you who don't know, means underrepresented minority. And essentially it lumps everyone. It lumps, it lumps Octavio with Ken and so on, and they lose their identity. And after having fought so long to be recognized for that identity. So if there's anything I leave you with, please write to your chancellor's office and ask them to stop doing that. And don't do it here.
It's funny.
What is that?
I said it's funny use that term. NSF uses URM as
I know. And so language is the most important tool, symbolic tool that we have, and language constructs reality, and it reveals and it hides. And this term URM reduces human beings into a non-existent category, essentially. And if you're interested, I have written an essay on this, the misbegotten URM. So what I'm saying is that that talk directly, identify the groups, because that's the only way we're going to get over our shyness in terms of speaking of these things. So one of the things that I've asked myself, why is it? Because this is a recurrent problem in the campuses that we work with. There is a lot of difficulty in talking about race directly. So like somebody will say, in addition to URMs, people will say, we have this many URMs, and the non-URMs, which is like a distortion of concepts, or they will say our diverse populations. Well, what does that mean, right? I couldn't believe it. This college, the NSS, is 66% Latino. I mean, I was floored when I saw that. And this college is 60% Latino. So to talk about URMs is totally ridiculous because, I mean, given your student population. So why is it so difficult to talk about race? Well, part is because we don't know how to talk about it, because we have come up with all kinds of euphemisms to talk about race without talking about it. And also because this is the results from one of the webinars we did for the project that you were involved in. And we asked about the fear of conflict, and you can see the results. Over 50% of the participants, and this was a project that was dealing with issues of equity where they were afraid. They don't want to cause conflict. And to talk about race causes conflict. I imagine that some of you here today might feel, uncomfortable with the directness on this topic. And that's because We just have to learn how to do it. So part of my role is to teach how to do it. All right. So the other question that I ask myself is often, you know, why is race missing? Pamela mentioned that I was just given an award by the American Education Research Association, and I got to give a lecture because I won that award. And what I did as part of my award was actually to analyze national documents that are aimed at fixing community colleges. Now, community colleges are the main entry point, particularly for Latinos, and also for African Americans. And these documents were about how to improve transfer. And they were written by other think tanks. And I decided to do a discourse analysis of the documents. And I was amazed that in these documents, which were talking about transfer, which is a major equity issue, there was zero mention of students, Latino students, African American students, and there were no citations to any scholars of color who have done work in this area. So this thing is why is race missing comes in part from that analysis. And so here are some of the reasons. I think that race is missing because there is a tendency to say, I care about all my students. Does that resonate? I don't see race. I don't think about it. So that is one of the issues. The other one I already said is too risky. Some people, well, I don't know now with our new administration, think that, you know, when Obama was our president, that we had gone over racism. But the one that's really problematic is the fourth bullet point. You know, racism tends to be perceived as an individual act and not as a structural issue, not as something that gets created by everyday practices. And I hope to be able to illustrate this today with an example. You know, people think about, you know, I'm not a racist, right? But it's not about the individual. The issue here is the structural. And you know, the URM is part of that structure. Closed academic networks are closed to critical race perspectives. This was more of the analysis that I had done, that when you have a homogeneous and closed network of scholars that are not familiar, whether with history or with scholars of color, they don't get new ideas. They just continue reproducing what they have always done. So, one of the points that I'm trying to make in relation to best practitioners as well as scholars is that, you know, papering over the issue of race makes for bad social theory. This comes from Massey, the sociologist. For bad research, for bad public policy, and I would say for bad instructional pedagogical practice as well. So, to be a best practitioner or to move from being a first-generation equity practitioner, you need to learn the basics of equity-minded knowledge and practices. And this is what I mean by equity-minded knowledge. What I already have been saying, you have to be race conscious, but race conscious in a critical way. You could be race conscious in a negative way as well. So what I'm talking about is being race conscious from a historical, from a structural perspective, as opposed to being, you know, colorblind. You need to be practice focused. You need to see how racism might actually be produced in your own classrooms, in your own labs, if you're counselors, in your own counseling office. Not because you're a racist, but because something is operating to disadvantage particular students. You know, you might be thinking, she's got to be kidding. We're 66% Latino. You know, how could this be happening here? And so if that's what you see in your mind, let's talk about that when I'm done. And don't forget to tell me when I should. And then the other thing is you have to have practitioner courage to make racism visible and discussable. I guess what I'm saying to you is that if you hear people making, using URM, say something about it. Don't wait for someone like me to always be the one to say it. We all have to have the courage to do it, and if more and more people do it, it will become a routine practice. So equity-mindedness. So equity has two dimensions. One is accountability, and the other one is a critical dimension. And the accountability dimension has to do with measures, with indicators. So in our work, this may not be relevant to you, but I think it is after looking at your data, is that you can think of equity as proportional representation. So for me, looking at you, 66% Latino, I would expect that to be my benchmark. That when we look at you just had graduation, that 66% of the students who graduated in biology were Latinos. Were they? Do we know?
No.
Okay. So that's what equity is to me, is proportional representation. I think whites are 7.9%. So I would expect that 7.9% of the graduates in biology would be white. So let's look at what happens here. So this is your data, which thank you, Nancy, again. So data are not self-acting. In order for data to make sense, you have to get your hands dirty in it. And so I did last night around 9 o'clock. And this is something that we don't often do in our own institutions. We have lots and lots of data, but we don't know how to look at it in ways that will make sense in our own college or department. So here is what you look like here at the college, right? So 66, almost 67% Latino, then Asian, and we have the numbers. Always good to have numbers and percentages. Okay, so everybody's aware of this data, I imagine.
Not for the college.
No?
For the university.
Okay, and where do you teach?
In Pan African Studies.
Okay. So what I did was I decided to look at the two departments in your college, the one that had the highest enrollment and the one that had the lowest enrollments. So, so sociology and physics. Anybody here from sociology?
Over here.
Okay, and physics? Okay. So what I did was this. Keeping in mind proportionality. So my thinking was, okay, and I did this for Latinos, so I thought, well, the enrollment in sociology should be at least 66.88% or 67%, and in physics also. But actually, the enrollment of Latinos in sociology is almost 75%, and in physics is 45%. So what I did is I calculated the percentage point gap difference. And so sociology, Latinos are 8 percentage points higher, so they're over equity. And in physics, they're 22 percentage points lower. So they're under equity in my way of thinking about it. Now, why that is, I don't know. And that is what's important, is when you see this, is to ask why, but actually ask good scholars to research it. And I'm going to talk about how to research why that is. Have you ever looked at the data in this way? Okay, so yes, you have.
Departments are looking at this data when they hire.
When they hire.
So the department chairs are looking at this data as they make a petition for new faculty and to strengthen the program.
Okay, so what I did with your data was I reformatted it so that it would make sense to me. And because I couldn't just look at the tables that Nancy sent me, because that, I would just see the numbers. I had to see patterns. And that's the problem with a lot of data that colleges use. It doesn't show patterns. It just shows numbers. And so this is important to do. So let's look at whites now. So you see here sociology and physics. The picture is reversed. Whites have more equity in physics and less equity in sociology. So does everyone see what I did? Okay. And then I looked at everything. And so I looked at over equity and under equity for all of your departments. I think that you have 15 departments. I think I got them all, I hope. But what you can see here is that Latinos are over equity in the most of the social sciences, and they're under equity in most of the sciences, natural sciences, right? Anything surprising here? Or is this like, this is known fact? Huh?
I think we just don't want to see it like that.
I think it's also this under equity. You're looking at Latino white,
No, I'm just looking at Latinos.
but I think it's important to also look at how that compares with other people of color. So my department, Pan-African Studies.
Of course.
That's because
It's-
we're mostly black.
Yeah, exactly. There are no whites in that department because I looked at it. Do you? I brought it all with me here. I have it all here. So here is for whites. So it's a total inverse. So they are over equity in the natural sciences, in history and anthropology as well. The under math, something must be happening in math. Are there people here from mathematics? Okay. So, so that's what it looks like. For any surprises there? So, so why is this important to me, and why I think it should be important to you? Is essentially you're 66% Latino, but that 66% is not distributed equitably, it appears. And there may be perfectly rational reasons for that. But right now I'm assuming that you don't know. Unless you do know. So the other aspect of equity is this critical dimension, which I already spoke about. And that is that you have to recognize that institutional racism is an endemic characteristic of colleges and universities. It has to be dismantled with strategies that are race conscious or color conscious and informed by critical theories of race. And so that's very abstract, and you probably all say yes, agree, you know. So I am going to show what I mean. But I'm going to show you actually a video of one of the math chairs that we work with. And, but when you listen to this video, to what he says, I want you to keep this in mind. So this is something that social cultural theorists call an activity setting. And essentially what they say is everything that we do takes place in an activity setting. So what you're going to hear the math chair talk about is hiring, right? So when we do faculty hiring, we create an activity setting which involves people, subjects, right? You have a search committee. And you have certain rules that are related to those searches. And those rules may be written, or they may be formal or informal, but there are still rules related to hiring. there is also artifacts, meaning that you have hiring guidelines, you have interview protocols, you have a protocol for doing the telephone interview. And so those are artifacts of the hiring process. And you have a division of labor. Different people do different things, right? The dean maybe approves the position. The search committee reviews the applications. And there's also a community external to you, which is maybe the rest of the university or everyone in the discipline. So we believe in our work that these are the kinds, that these aspects of the activity setting need to be remediated in order to be able to, for instance, diversify the faculty or diversify the physics department. So that if we change the rules or we change the subjects or the artifacts, that everything else might change. And so I want you to listen to James Gray now. So this is James Gray, and he is the chair of the math department. It's a community college, so try to suspend judgment about that. In Colorado, and the term first generation equity practitioner came from him. So when I first met James and we started working with this college, we worked with him for 2 years, he had never heard of equity, he had never thought about race, and so he, after working with us, called himself, I was the first generation equity practitioner. So let's hope that this all works.
84.6% of our faculty have been white. And so this is one of those moments when the light's shining on you, and you have to be very honest with yourself. And it's a very difficult thing. And do you notice up here, there's a group which is missing, which is African American. And when you take a look and you see that in the time you've been department chair, there hasn't been a single African American male who taught college algebra. Like, are you kidding me? Over 10 years, not a single African American male. And this is the point when it's so biased, it's so improbable that it couldn't have happened almost without the intent of that actually happening. My ability to impact that is the same as somebody who was intentionally not hiring African Americans to teach. So with our part-time faculty, what I was really doing is I was taking a look for people who kind of manifested the things that I saw about myself. So one of those things was experience. Experience was really important. Experience was really important. And what I found out is when I was recruiting those concurrent enrollment faculty, I was recruiting them because they were known, all right? The way my colleague puts it is what I was really trying to do is I was trying to stop from any problems from happening for me to deal with, as opposed to recruiting people and actually trying to help them. As far as the full-time faculty go, I thought I had a great strategy for recruiting candidates for full-time faculty. So what I would do is across our 13 community colleges in Colorado, I knew that the department chairs, and I would forward the job postings onto the other faculty, and what I'd be getting is people who were experienced in our own community college system. So I go to our conference last September, and there was about 200 people in the room that are just math faculty. There wasn't a single African American in that room. Again, it was one of those things that's so improbable it almost couldn't have happened without it intentionally been designed to do that, right? So my strategy was providing a disadvantage for African Americans in a tremendous way. So that was one of those things that I had to be very honest with myself. So in terms of recruiting, I have recruited African American faculty since then. One of the full-time positions was hired was an African American faculty. And if you go back to that idea of the question of value, what value do we really want? Deconstructing everything you believe and what the value is, there's a lot of strengths that we completely ignore, that we were completely unaware of because we were kind of living in our own world, right? So the other faculty member that we've hired is a Hispanic, a very young, very inexperienced Hispanic who has a degree in statistics. So we did interviews. We normally do phone interviews. Usually you do about 5 or 6 or 7. This time we did 25, right? When we brought in face-to-face, we decided we're only going to bring in 6 because it was so hard to do 25. We couldn't make a decision, so we said we'll go to 10, okay? And there was that one person who was number 11, Let's just bring him in. And he turned out to be the best. He turned out he did an extraordinary teaching demonstration. He was doing everything we wanted in terms of success, in terms of expectation, structure, and communication. And by the way, our teaching demonstration was about the first day of class. So they not only had to do some math teaching, they had to show what the structure of their class was actually like. And interestingly enough, our Hispanic candidates came in and they hit the structure thing dead on. Dead on. And some of our white candidates tended to stand up and just talk about it, and you're flipping through the syllabus that they provided, and it's really hard. So it's really interesting when you change that sense of value, what you really value and what you're looking for. It really changes the world you live in. Oh.
So, yeah, so did you hear what changed? Right? What changed? Yes.
What's his name?
James Gray.
James Gray?
Gray.
Okay.
And if you would like to meet him, he will be a fellow in our center starting in June. He's coming for a year to work with us. So did you hear what changed? Like what changed? His paradigm changed? Okay, yes. But in terms of the doing, so
the values.
Values, okay.
Strategies for sending out the job.
What? Yeah, I mean, they went from talking to 6 people to 25.
Process.
They took out the experience that was totally irrelevant to the job. You know, like community college experience, for instance, right? That wasn't necessary as such. And they hired this other guy, Chris, you know, who had not taught at a community college. And but the other thing that they changed, so one of the exercises that we do with the faculty that we work with is a review of the syllabus from an equity perspective. And they had learned that from us. So what he did was he asked the candidates to explain how would he or she explain the syllabus to the students on the first day of class. And they did that as a way of assessing whether the faculty member had the notion of how to connect with students through the syllabus. That the syllabus was not just a contract. The syllabus was in fact an artifact that mediates learning. So let me go now to what do I mean by equity. So one of the things that gets confused often is that everybody thinks that we have equality, and when we avoid race, we're assuming that this is like this, it's all equal, right? But we know that that's not the way that it is, and I imagine that even here in your own college, you have students like the ones who are in the left, who have had all kinds of, boxes on which to stand, scholarships, educated parents, middle to upper class, honors courses. And I realize that you are a working class college or university, so that this may not be as accentuated as it is in other institutions, but there are probably differences, even here. And a lot of those other students that are coming here, those 66% Latinos, I'm making a wild generalization here, may be the first in their families to come to college. They may be coming from the Los Angeles public schools where the ratio of counselors is 1 to 1,000, where they don't have AP courses and so forth. So that's something that is important to understand. And so, that the system, the ladder in the far right is broken often, and it's broken because of disproportionate remediation. I noticed that in your plan that was mentioned as one of the problems. Too many students needing remedial courses, and there is implicit bias and so forth. So what we say is we have to fix the ladder, not the students, because oftentimes when we see inequalities, we go to the students, right? And I'll say some more about that. But so the way that we fix the ladder is first of all, we use data, kind of like the way that I showed you, as well as in other ways, so that the data are accessible to you who are not accustomed to looking at data every single day. Goal setting and action planning, and then focusing on faculty by using the practices of inquiry. And let me just tell you what I mean by that. So I don't mean to pick in the physics department, but let's just say that there is a problem in physics. And I don't know what that problem is. And I am going to start from Dewey's, dictum that when you see a problem, you cannot assume that you know why. You have to research it. So what I would say is, in terms of inquiry, we would get all of the faculty in the physics department together, for instance. And we would start by looking at, let's look at all the courses offered in physics. Let us now look at who is in those courses and how are they doing. How many students drop after the first exam given in Physics 101? Let's all look at the syllabus, or the syllabi that are used in the physics department. Let's do peer-to-peer classroom observations to see what's going on in the classroom. That's what I mean by inquiry. It's essentially treating your practices as unfamiliar and examining them as if you were like an anthropologist. Okay, so best practitioners understand the difference between equity and deficit-minded cognitive frames. So what do I mean by a cognitive frame? I mean, we all have schemas, and we have culturally acquired knowledge. And that culturally acquired knowledge is a cognitive frame that guides the questions that are asked, the kind of information that we collect, what is noticed, how problems are defined. The fact that we use URM, that's part of a cognitive frame that has learned to see all non-white people as being possibly a single universalized category. So that's, and the psychologists in the room, I'm sure, know this, cognitive frames. And so the issue for us is that, that in higher education, the dominant cognitive frame in relation to students is a deficit one. And it's not because we are bad people, but it's because that's the way that we have been taught. All of our theories of student success tend to focus on what students do, not on what faculty do. We have all kinds of surveys on student engagement, for instance. We don't have surveys on faculty engagement. So what ends up happening is that when John sees that his students, Latino students, are not doing well, he attributes it to, their motivation, their, having conscientiousness, being engaged, the way that they interact with the faculty. Do they come during office hours? Do they have the study skills? Are they committed? And so on. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, okay. So I am not suggesting that there isn't. There's always some truth to some of these things. But the question that we don't ask ourselves is, what is it that I am doing that might not be working well in this class? What is it about my practice that I seem to be able to create lots of success for white students or other students, and I am not able to do it for African American students? Why is that? And so for us, equity-mindedness is to actually be aware that, for instance, that when I am in class and I have students participating, that there is one or a couple of students who never participate. Let me just give you an example. a philosophy instructor at Long Beach, where City College. He realized that, he said, I have these Latina students, they never speak in class. He decided to use Gloria Anzaldua's book, yes, Return. Let me just say something about institutional effort. So the way that I'm approaching this is that racial equity in educational outcomes should be an institutional effort, not a student effort. So all of our theories of student success, and no one knows this better than Octavio, is that student success is based on how much effort the student invests. And I'm saying here, it's also about institutional effort to be responsive, not to all students, but to particular students, because equity is about the redistribution of resources to those who need it most. It's not about the equal ladders. It's about how to put resources into that ladder on the right. Okay, so how do you move from first-generation equity practitioner to equity-minded practitioner? One of the things that we did, which I'm not going to go into in detail, is that we created this thing called the equity scorecard, and which in some ways captures the accountability side of equity as well as the critical aspects of it. And it consists of a suite of tools that colleges that work with us use in order to look at their own data, and then to do the kinds of inquiry that I spoke about. And so I already mentioned what is inquiry, but essentially inquiry is this. It's asking why does this situation exist, and why are things done in this particular way? And we start out with with the syllabus, and you might be thinking, give me a break, looking at syllabus, what difference is that going to make, right? I bet that some of you are thinking that. And so everybody says that. And actually the syllabus review activity that we do is one of our most popular after it's done. And the reason for that is because it has recursive effects. It's not just about looking at the syllabus. The syllabus generates a discussion about teaching, particularly when you sit there with it and you suddenly realize that all of the language in your syllabus is very authoritarian. It's about the rules. It's about the ways in which you can fail the course rather than the ways in which you can succeed in the course. The syllabi also can convey implicit biases, and I'll share my own bias. So I teach graduate students, and I thought I was being funny, and I said, if you are going to be 15 minutes or more late to class, do like in the opera, wait until intermission. And my students pointed out to me, isn't that interesting? You assume that we have been to the opera and would know what that means, and they were right. So we all do it, and so the purpose of looking at the syllabus in part is for that. And when we do it, it's not that you just look at it. We actually have a protocol that has to be filled out, and it has been a very productive activity. So so this is the kinds of things that we look at in terms of inquiry, and this is just a sample of them. So what you find sometimes when you do this, so this was in one of the math syllabus. This was a remedial math course, and in the syllabus, the students were given this formula on how to calculate their grades. Now, again, this instructor was probably like me. I was being funny about the opera, and maybe he was, wanting to be funny about, or not, I don't know. Actually, the cartoon was put there by my students. Okay, so the syllabus also can provide a glimpse into into the classroom culture. So I taught for the first day yesterday, I teach in the summer, and in my syllabus, there is, you have to, I teach qualitative methods. These are doctoral students, but doctoral students are also afraid. And so in the syllabus, besides saying welcome, we're going to have fun in this course, I also tell them the tricks, the hidden tricks of how you read journal articles in a way that enables you to then come to class and participate, because there's a method to that, right? And not everyone knows it. And so I share that with them. One of the things that I never see in math syllabi is how to study for a math test. There are tricks for studying for a math test, but we don't share that hidden knowledge with our students. And the syllabus is a place where you can do that. Another thing that James, even though this data are not disaggregated by race, what he did, that was the chair of the math, he took the course data for each math course and he organized it by race and ethnicity, including his own. And what he did, because he knew that the faculty would be apprehensive about this, he first shared with them his results, which were not good. And then from there, he went on to meet with each faculty member to see what was happening. Their equity gaps has virtually closed in terms of mathematics. These are developed remedial math and the first college level math course. And the reason for that is because the faculty members have developed new ways of looking at their classrooms. I am also aware that, yes, I can claim that it's because of us. Anything could have happened, right? We're not controlling for changes in students, but the fact is that faculty in math is very different now. Well, they're different in terms of who has been hired, and they're also different in terms of how you're thinking about issues of race. Now, this will surprise you. This is your data in 2004. Now this is your university. So when I founded the Center for Urban Education, we developed the equity scorecard, and Cal State LA was one of our initial partners. It was one of 14 institutions. The people who we work with are no longer here. Desdemona Cardosa and Alfredo yes, Alfredo Gonzalez, and we had a team of people here, and what they did was they looked at the highest enrolling introductory courses, and then they compared for each group how they were doing compared to the average, and then they put it in color so that everybody could see the patterns. And I remember Jim Rosser looking at this, who was president then, and just, thinking, oh my God. But some of you who are mathematicians or statisticians here may be thinking that is a very crude method. You can't do that. And yes, it is a crude method, but for the purposes of developing awareness and initiating action, it's very, very powerful. And that's what matters. It's not the statistical elegance. And remember that we're working with the entire population. This actually, it was an article in Change Magazine back in 2005-06. And I bet that most of you, were any of you aware of this? That you were part of the first? Yeah. You were. And then, so what happens is that, things get lost. Changes happen. So what I'm trying to say is, in order to develop equity-mindedness, there's got to be a way of making it into a routine so that it doesn't disappear with people. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to talk about, I probably should stop. Pamela?
I'm getting keys from my feet. Do you want to read the question?
I'll stop here. I will stop here. I think I've already said enough. I came across this. This is a student from Northridge, and a foster child. And there was a story about her in the CSU system website. She just graduated. And the reason why I put it up here is because it's the kind of thing that, you know, this child was a foster child, and the story is very, very sad. And, but you know, she mentions her family, and her mother just telling her that she wasn't really going to be successful because of her skin color being darker than her sister. And then she talks about when she went to Cal State Long Beach. You know, she says, I felt so insecure sitting in my first lecture hall with a class of over 100 people. I felt as if I didn't belong and that everyone else was light years smarter than I was. And it was because of that I didn't belong. So sense of belonging is a non-cognitive competence, and it can be taught. There are things that the faculty member in the classroom can do to help students feel like they belong, like knowing their name, talking to them, you know, after class, actually reaching out to the student. And it makes a big, big difference. There are all kinds of small experiments around these issues. And then she talks about her mentor, Dr. Cedric Hackett, who had an open heart, caring heart, and open door, caring heart, and so on. Students do need, they need you to be more than, you know, content transmitters. They need to feel cared for and valued, and like we all did. But maybe, you know, we took that for granted. So let me just go back just here. So what I guess the takeaway message is, you know, equity is an institutional responsibility. Equity gaps are a problem of practice. I know that they're also a problem of bigger societal issues, whether it's DACA, it's hunger, it's lack of money. Yes, that is true. And creating equity is a matter of reflection, learning, and change. And every practitioner can be an equity leader. You know, I can talk about this to you, but I have also felt tested by these sort of principles. Not all my doctoral students come with the same preparation, and it's much easier to work with those that come ready, you know, they already know how to be PhD students. And I happen to have a student who at the beginning was not doing well. And in fact, most of the faculty felt that the student should not be in the program. And there were times when it was frustrating. But I worked with her, and she just finished. She finished in time. She also won a major fellowship. It just took a little bit more time, and it meant that I had to do something different with her than I had to do with other students. And I know that it's more work, and sometimes we do get frustrated, but the payoff can be really wonderful because this student has really learned how to be an excellent qualitative researcher and use the methods of narrative inquiry that makes faculty members who hear this stories that she has collected cry and want to change the practices. So I'll leave you with that, and I guess if you want me to add